Welcome to the TalentGrow Show, where you can get actionable, results-oriented insight and advice on how to take your leadership, communication, and people skills to the next level and become the kind of leader people want to follow. And now, your host and leadership development strategist, Halelly Azulay.
Welcome back, Talent Growers, to another episode of the TalentGrow Show. Lately, it seems that whenever I ask anybody how they're doing, the answer is usually busy or even crazy busy, right? Well, I'm actually guilty of that answer too. I'm Halelly Azulay, your leadership development strategist here at TalentGrow. And since this episode is being released at the beginning of a new year, I thought that it would be great to help us all try to get better control of this craziness and busyness and kick off a wonderfully productive and fulfilling year. And I've got the perfect guest for us this week. She's amazingly insightful, an expert on productivity. Her name is Juliet Funt. She's wonderful and witty. I saw her as a speaker, and she shares so many great productivity enhancing ideas and techniques around a concept she calls white space and overcoming what she calls the thieves of productivity. This is a super actionable episode with ideas for actions that you can take today to boost not just your own productivity, but also the productivity of your team. Don't forget to tell me your reactions afterwards. But in the meantime, here we go, episode 70. Welcome back, Talent Growers. This is Halelly Azulay, and I am here with Juliet Funt. She is a recognized consultant and speaker and founder of White Space at Work. Her mission, check this out, to unearth the potential of companies by unburdening their talent. She calls herself a warrior against reactive busyness. And I was able to see her do a keynote at a conference for one of my professional organizations. And let me tell you, I was blown away. And not only am I a speaker myself, and I am exposed to many speakers because I attend and speak at a lot of conferences, but I also teach public speaking skills. And so it's not that easy to make me speechless, but this woman did. So you really did. I mean, you blew it out of the water, Juliet. So I'm really excited to have you here. I think that what you have to share is super important to every person and especially to leaders. So welcome to the TalentGrow Show.
Thank you so much. It's going to be so fun. And it was a great event where I met you.
Yes, it was. And I look forward to seeing you again there next year. So, Juliet, before we get into the nitty gritty of white space and everything about how to improve productivity in the workplace, I want you to tell us a very brief description of your professional journey. We always start that way. Where did you start and how did you get to where you are today?
Sure. That's always fun to talk about. So in college, I was an actress. And I knew that I liked to be in front of people and working with them, but I grew quickly tired of pretending to be another person. And so I went back to school and I took some OD classes and I fell in love with training and teaching and sort of still being with people and up in front of them, but really helping them change the way that they lived or worked or thought or something like that. And then those classes led into speaking and consulting and training. And I've been doing that for 18 years, and 13 of them have been exclusively on this topic called white space, which sort of came into my life 13 years ago, partially honestly by market demand and partially by my own curiosities, and immediately took over everything else that we were doing. And it's really fun that I continue to find interesting elements of this topic, and I think I might forever because it's such untapped territory in our busy world, and the idea of bringing thoughtfulness back to work, the idea of letting go of some of the low value junk. I'm certainly not the first person or company to think of that, but there is just a teeny tiny group, a tiny army of these warriors trying to change the way that people work, and we're just on the very, very, very early cusp of that kind of transformation.
And the world needs this kind of change. So before we get any further into it, we're speaking about white space as if everyone understands exactly what we mean. But let's unpack that. What do you mean by white space and why should we want more of it?
When we go into companies, we usually work mostly with mid-sized and larger companies. What we see is people who are drowning in junk, in meetings and emails and decks and reports and fire drills and all the stuff that we become very, very, very acculturated to tolerating, but is really wasting our capacity. And we teach them to stop doing so much of that. And what this creates is found time. And we call that time white space. It is that time that is free then for things like strategy and creativity and introspection and thinking and looking at the big picture and looking deeply and all the richer kinds of mental exploration that we never have time to do because we're too busy with our CCs. And so that is the definition of white space. And we think that when talented folks do not have thinking as part of their daily to-do list, that all businesses suffer. And some of them suffer with extraordinary cost that I can unpack for you a little bit in a minute if you're interested. It costs in many different areas.
Sure. Let's get everybody scared.
Some healthy pain.
Shaking. No, I'm kidding. But it is actually more costly than most of us realize. I think
it is amazing. Yeah.
Listening feels the pain. I know, because I talk to people all the time. I know they feel the pain, but I think everyone feels guilty for feeling this pain, like something's wrong with them and they should just get with the program.
There is a very personalized element to the guilt where we all kind of are feeling like if we just found the right filing system or podcast or tip or tool, then suddenly work would just feel effortless. And that's because we undervalue all the cultural elements that are pressing on us, of which we have zero control. And it is my job a little bit to create a little bit of pain, because when you look at these companies, anyone on your podcast that's listening is a leader. If they have one direct report, if they have 500 direct reports, they have some power to change the direction of the ship. And so getting honest about cost is very, very important. So I will unpack that. One thing we talk about is top line cost. And that's probably not something we'll dig deeply into here because that's more of a kind of a C-suite concern. But top line cost, the top line grows when people can come up with certain kinds of ideas. And when they don't have thoughtfulness, those ideas are never heard from. And so that is the top line cost. Then there's the human side, which you talk about in your materials about really understanding the human side of work. This is very obvious, but we've learned to ignore it. The health consequences, the wellness consequences, the family consequences, the balance consequences, the not knowing our own kids well consequences of just working this way. But what most companies really get the most shock by is financial cost. And it's just because nobody's doing this research yet. And I think that we are on really, really uncharted territory in terms of taking things like unnecessary emails and meetings and interruptions, taking HR data where we get people's salary, and we just do the math to see what it costs. And what we tend to see is about $1 million of annual waste for every 50 people in a team.
Ouch.
So if you start doing some multiplying to your typical mid-sized business or enterprise, it's a crazy amount of money. It's a crazy, crazy amount of money. And if you can't get a leader to care about this problem from the human side or from the creativity side, then sometimes you can just get them to sit up around. It's a stupid waste of money.
Yes. And you say that there are thieves of productivity that tend to be the culprits of this kind of cost. What are they?
Yes. So we call the thieves of productivity. There are 4 things that primarily drive overload. And just so you know where they came from from us researching those cultural elements I talk about that weigh down upon people and make it not only their fault that they're so busy. We took the 33 different elements and we cross-referenced them and we dissected them and we played with them. And we found that there were 4 main drivers, but that they were surprises because they were actually assets that ran amok. They were not negative things. So the thieves are drive, excellence, information, and activity. And when you think of these 4 things, you wouldn't want to work anywhere where people didn't have drive and a commitment to excellence and a lust for information and, the ability to be passionate and moving quickly. But when they are in the age of overload, where everything is very much about stimulation and little wins and moving fast, they just keep us constantly seduced into this very shallow, constantly moving way of working. And the deep work is harder to get to. And they remind me, there's a plant in California called morning glory. I don't know if everybody has it where they live, but it's a vine and it grows these really beautiful purple flowers.
Yes.
And when I drove by it the first time, I thought, oh my God, I got to plant that in the backyard. So I got a lot of it and I got too much of it. And I planted it everywhere and it was gorgeous. It was very just stunning. But it also has these little kind of curly tendrils that come off of the vine. And what you find out about morning glory in about a month is that it takes over everything. It wraps around, the tendrils wrap around your bicycles and your outdoor faucets and your security gate. And everything is taken over. And that's sort of how I think about the thieves. The beautiful, gorgeous, purple, vital, gorgeous flower that we all want, of being driven and excellent and informed and active, but easily overgrown and hard to control.
That's a fascinating metaphor. I love it. And then it just chokes whatever it's wrapped around.
Right.
It kills it and
right.
food. Yeah. We know some people like that too. So, oh my goodness. Well, I want to talk more about them, but I'd love for you to share if you have like an example or a story that can help us understand, maybe even just one of these. Like, what's a great example for one of these thieves and how it's something really good, except for when it takes over?
Sure. I mean, it's interesting. So everybody has a thief that is usually dominant for them, and some people will find more than one. But for me, my thief is excellence, and I'm just a raging perfectionist. And so probably good for me to share my own stories and not other people's, because it's such an interesting balance of when the thief is good and when the thief is poor. So for instance, we were getting ready for a giant global event, and I think I redid our business cards 3 times in the print run. And then separately and in parallel, we were tweaking a website. We lost one designer. The other one had a loss in the family. They left. We were coming up on the deadline. And in that case of that website, what was really important for me was to ask myself where good enough was good enough, and who would really tell the difference between the level of finesse that I wanted and the level of finesse that anybody cared about, and make it be good enough. In the case of the cards, in my knowledge of what makes people notice things, there's a lot of subconscious in the way that people lean into marketing, tactile and the feel and the paper and the feel of it. In that instance, I think my excellence or perfectionism was well served to get those cards to a point where they had impact. If I had allowed myself to go all the way down the road that I wanted in terms of excellence for the site, we would have missed deadlines. And more importantly, no one would have noticed, because it really would have been a recreational exercise for me. And that's one of the things, is learning to parse out when you're using your thief for good and when you're using your thief in a poor way, because they're very, very hard to tell the difference between, but that's really the critical line of demarcation. And when you start to be aware of it, what you'll notice is that there's a whole subset of the way that you use your own thief or dominant thieves that are just about sort of habit and recreation. So information people who like to binge on scoreboards and spreadsheets and dashboards and reading and internet tabs and tabs and tabs, sometimes, thank God they do that level of research. And sometimes it's falling into the realm of that habitual and recreational. And that's the skill set, is to start to be able to tell the difference and when to use those precious resources and when to let them go.
Is there some kind of a trick to it, or is it really just being aware of yourself and knowing your own line? I mean, is there some way that you teach people to be better at noticing the differentiation?
So we have 4 questions that we teach people to use that map to the thieves. And I can say them for you, but we'll also provide a website at the end that has them written down, so people don't have to be scribbling wildly while we're talking.
Yes.
We feel that the questions are the filter that helps people slowly learn to make that division. So I'll tell you what they are, and then I'll tell you which thief they map to. So the questions are, is there anything I can let go of? Where is good enough good enough? What do I truly need to know? And what deserves my attention? Now, if you're paying attention, you can map some of them yourself. Drive that always wants to have more projects and more stuff and more activities and climb the high hill and climb the next hill. They need to hear, is there anything I can let go of? Because you can't do everything at once that way. Yeah. Excellence needs to hear, where is good enough good enough? Information needs to hear, what do I truly need to know? And then activity needs to hear, what deserves my attention. And when people use the questions on a regular basis, they slowly start teaching themselves to create this separation. They also can teach each other, because we believe very passionately that white space should be explored as a team or a business unit or an organization. And when you have all this language together, you can say to each other, I think, we're slipping into drive here. We're letting drive turn into overdrive. We're slipping from information to information overload here, and we can give each other feedback and we can have dialogue using these terms. And that's the slow training process that gets people to be better at this?
And I love it. These are such helpful and simple questions, but I think that they will be so meaningful. And it makes me wonder, do teams take on a particular, I guess, some culture, a thief that becomes predominant, or is it the leader's main thief that tends to override the others within a team?
Yes, that's a great question. So some teams have a creatively healthy balance of thieves. So for instance, my COO is Drive and I'm Excellence. So Drive always wants to go forward, go forward, go forward, and Excellence wants to stay and perfect and perfect and perfect. So sometimes they can helpfully balance each other in a positive context. But often they just feed upon each other, and so there tends to be a very fear-based mimicking of whatever thieves are being worshipped above you. So if the CEO is a fanatic for excellence, then everybody becomes a perfectionist. And if the CEO is a fanatic for information, then everybody becomes a researcher, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a really powerful trickling down. All of the stuff that we talk about today and all the stuff that we teach in training at Whitespace is super cultural. It's unlike other kinds of training where we talked about this just before. If you took sales training or negotiation skills or a lot of those things, you could just go by yourself in your little line of business, your little niche with your customers, and you could do it. But in Whitespace, there's a very strong feeling of culture and team, both in what the problem looks like and in what solving it looks like.
That's really interesting. So listeners are leaders or are preparing for leadership. What is something that they can do, or how do you suggest that they get started to create more white space for themselves as leaders? And of course, as you just mentioned, for their teams and for their organization. And what is something that they can do?
Great. So I'm going to give you three somethings kind of in a building order that I'd like you to consider them. So the first one is we say, before you do anything, be Jane Goodall, which means just to take a period of time to observe what is actually true now in your team before you dive into changing it. Because sometimes people get excited or they'll listen to a podcast or go on our website and then they'll say, okay, we need to start cutting meetings and doing email etiquette classes and making time to think. And they're diving into activity too fast and there hasn't been thoughtfulness, just like the problem that we described. So that idea of first be an anthropologist, just be a curious and neutral observer. What's the team like? How do they work? Who's got what thieves? What's driving you? Do you work evenings and weekends? Does everybody check email after 8 o'clock at night? What is real for you before you start changing? The next thing that we love for leaders to do is make a vulnerable admission of some kind. And honestly, this should not be hard for anybody to do in terms of thinking of one. It just might be challenging in terms of your public face to share it. But we all as leaders, myself included, have places where we violate other people's white space or where we are complicit in the problem. I'm a terrible interrupter, as an example. I just move so fast that I'm like holding my lips closed on a conference call, trying not to interrupt a major client because it's such a strong, powerful blind spot or habit for me. Everybody has one. Everybody has stuff like this. And so when you go to your team and you say, listen, I discovered this white space thing and here's what I learned, I'm part of the problem. And let me tell you first, before we decide if we want to do anything together about this, let me tell you, I send a lot of emails on Sunday and you have no idea if you're supposed to answer them or not. And I'm sorry for that. And I want you to realize that I'm taking a look at that. So when you make whatever it is, that vulnerable admission for you, something that's real, some kind of magical shifting starts happening where people are then more willing and able to talk about what's real for them because they've heard you be so surprisingly open. And then the third thing is based on some research from some friends of ours at a leadership event called the Global Leadership Summit. And what they found is the largest leadership event in the world. It streams to over 300,000-400,000 people. And they found that they did research of people following the exposure to their ideas at their event. And they found that they had 154% increase in key outcomes when they took a learning action upon arriving home, not just heard about it, not just thought about it, but took a learning action. So what we've done is we've designed a learning action that your listeners can take with their team. It is a 3-part module from our digital learning system that we let them use at no cost. And we suggest that they take one lesson each week for 3 weeks, and they do it with their team together. They sit down, They watch a video, they do a little activity, 13 minutes a week, not a big commitment, and then they talk about how that was. And then on the fourth week, they meet to discuss application ideas. And one of the nice things about this for you guys is going to be that if you like what we're talking about, it's hard to go home and say, it's hard to play telephone, go back to your team and say, let me tell you about this thing that I heard on this podcast. But if you have a digital little module that you can just show them, then it becomes incredibly easier. So we have that for them, and it covers some kind of basic white space topics, and they can access that at whitespacetrial.com. That's also where I've mentioned we have the questions posted in the Thieves of Productivity, whitespacetrial.com.
That's really cool. And thank you for making that available. It sounds like such a practical way for people to think further about this topic. But I love that you are empowering leaders to be able to have the tools they need, because you're right. Like so often you feel like, let me just play this podcast for you so you can hear how this person described it. Because it's like I think you said broken telephone, right? And you just don't do it the same way.
And you could certainly do that too. But what happens? So here's what's going to happen. I don't know how many leaders we have listening, but let's say there's 100. It's not 100, but let's say many of those people will go, yes, this is such a problem for my people. And then somewhere in between the moment the podcast ends and the next business day, they're sucked back into the busyness.
Yeah.
And it all just sort of fades. And so you really need something very, very tangible to start creating dialogue a bit about this, because we're all too busy to become less busy, right? So it's really challenging to start. And so this gives you something super, super concrete, like holding a glass in your hand. I'm holding a thing. I have something. I can put it on the desk and show it to everybody. And for those of you out there who do feel that this is a problem that might be sacrificing creativity or engagement or something in your team, I really want to caution you against that getting sucked back in, because you'll wake up 3 weeks from now and go, whatever, I was going to do something about that white space thing. And that's super typical. It's, we watch it happen over and over and over and over. So if that happens to you, you're not alone, but if maybe being cautioned against it will help.
So did we cover all three things you said? Well, the first one was be an anthropologist. And the second one was, I think...
Jane Goodall. The second one is make a vulnerable admission. Say something about yourself where you're part of the problem, so that they know that you're... The reason for that is they need to know that you're also introspecting, that you're not just finding the next thing that would be good for them to do, but that you're also doing it yourself.
And the human need, or the humans were hardwired for reciprocity. So if you said it, right? I mean, if you show vulnerability, you actually trigger in the other person, almost subconsciously, you trigger in them a need to be vulnerable back. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then the third one is doing the free trial.
The trial.
That's cool. Great. So I want to ask you one more thing before we start to wrap up. You said white space is a place to be, just to be in thought and to be creative and to be reflective and not to be busy. Is there like a recommended amount of time, or is there sort of like a recipe for what right looks like?
It's always interesting to me who asks that question, because a lot of people do. They tend to be very specific folks who like that. There is no formula. Some people like to take timed white space. It helps them if they set a timer. Some people like to have a natural flow to it. Let me break down a couple of the traditional ways of using the time so you know. First of all, there's two ways you could use a moment of white space: to be recuperative or to be constructive. So the recuperative side is when you just need to go, you just need to reboot. And then the constructive side is that purposeful time set aside to think or ponder or look into something strategic or creative. Mm-hmm. And both are important. A lot of people will think that they're deferring a little more in their heads. They think of it first as the recuperative side, but that's really only a small part of it. The other thing is you don't need long stretches of time. Yeah, if you're planning the strategy for your company, I'm hoping that you would have a half an hour or 45 minutes of white space. But most applications are just 5 seconds here, 1 minute there, 30 seconds here. It's about just opening up the way the day feels with these little insertions of pause that make so much of the difference. And actually the name white space came from imagining looking at the pages on a calendar. You know this feeling when some things cancel and then you delete them off your Outlook and then you look and you go, oh, it's so white. So, and then you can just breathe and all sorts of things feel possible. And that literal white space on your calendar is part of where we're heading. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. There are many, many days where I will take 5 cumulative minutes of white space, but it's enough because maybe it was 10 30-second breaks, or maybe it was 5 1-minute moments where I stopped, or maybe it was 1 5-minute chunk where I really pulled back and thought about my day, and that was sufficient.
Mm-hmm. And when you're in the white space, again, this is probably a question of whatever the type of person you just said that would ask this. And I'm doing
like a lot of structure and direction.
I do. It's true. And for my friends who do also. So I hear that you say that sometimes it's just sort of letting go. Sometimes it's just breathing. Sometimes it's just reflection. Do you also suggest doing something during that time? Or do you sort of sit there and just let the time pass? Or do you journal? Or what do you do?
You could journal. I mean, the whole point of white space is to have we call it a strategic pause taken between activities. Okay. So it is a pause. It's actually the abstaining from doing during that period of time so that you can move up into thinking. Okay. And so if you have a legal pad and ideas come out, or if you're walking and you need to jot notes down, or if you need to take memos in your phone, that's a completely typical outpouring of the kind of ideas and thoughts that probably never have time to be heard because you're busy all the time. Yeah. But if you do something during your white space, you would technically not be doing white space.
Gotcha. Perfect. Well, Juliet, it's been fun. We got to start wrapping up. And before we let people know exactly how they can get in touch and learn more from you, and also make sure that they have at least one specific action, although you've given many specific actions they can take. What's new and exciting for you? What's on your horizon that's got you energized these days?
My family and I are going to live in Spain for 6 weeks in the beginning of the year. And we are taking some of our own, we were talking before about sabbaticals, we're taking some of our own dedication to extreme white space and picking up everything. I have a little work in Germany in February, so we're going to the month of January is going to be just, I don't know what, flamenco lessons or guitar or something. And then I'll do a little work in Germany and we'll come home mid-February. So I'm looking at little white villages to decide where we're going to go and learn a little bit more about the Madrid market. We have some clients there that want to learn a little bit about white space, and that's our plan.
Wow, that's so exciting. I'm jealous and happy for you.
It was motivated by our dear friend David Covey, I was starting to tell you, who took his family on these wonderful, we would call deep white space sabbaticals, where he completely stepped back from his life so that he could turn around and look back at it, and couldn't be a bigger fan of that.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Well, I definitely want to hear about it afterwards, so we'll have to stay in touch. So what's the one specific action that people can take today or tomorrow to start taking action towards making more white space in their world?
Okay, so here's what I would love for them to do is prep an email now to your core team, whoever it is that you work with, and tell them that you would like to expose them to this content once a week for a very short period of time, and have them sign up on the trial page. And then you can start doing it together 1 week from today. So that's whitespacetrial.com, and we can send it in. I'm sure you can post it in show notes or something like that.
Exactly. I will link it to it in the show notes. And cool. Well, I hope people will do it. That sounds fun. And how can people stay in touch, learn more about you? I know you hang out on social media at all.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter once a day, just a little sip a day, like we like to do social media at Whitespace. But you can find us at whitespaceatwork.com is where you can learn more about everything that we're up to.
Awesome. Well, it's been fun talking with you. I find you very inspirational, and I hope that everyone listening takes action. As Juliet says, it's good to learn and it's nice to have insights, but without action, it's probably not that meaningful. So thank you for sharing your insights with us. And I look forward to everyone continuing to learn from you as well, Juliet.
Thanks, honey, so much.
Wow. So practical and enlightening, right, talent growers? I'd love to hear from you. What's your biggest takeaway from this episode? And more importantly, what do you plan to do about it? How do you plan to enact your lessons learned? Go over to the comment section below the show notes over at talentgrow.com/podcast/episode 70. That's also where you'll find the links that Juliet mentioned. And let me know in the comments, what's your biggest takeaway and what do you plan to do about it? Or you can also comment over on our Facebook page. It's TalentGrow Show on Facebook, or our listener group. on Facebook. It's called the Talent Growers Community. If you search it, you just ask to join. And as a listener of this show, you are free to be part of the community. So come on over. Let's get a conversation going. Well, that's it for this episode. I'm Halelly Azulay, your leadership development strategist. Thank you for listening. I appreciate you. And until the next time, make today great.
Thanks for listening to the TalentGrow Show, where we help you develop your talent to become the kind of leader that people want to follow. For more information, visit talentgrow.com.